car's on fire, and there's no driver at the wheel. And the sewers are all muddied with 1,000 lonely suicides. And a dark wind blows. The government is corrupt. And we're on so many drugs with the radio on and the curtains drawn. We're trapped in the belly of this horrible machine. And the machine is bleeding to death. The sun has fallen down. And the billboards are all leering. And the flags are all dead at the top of their poles. It went like this. The buildings toppled in on themselves. Mothers clutching babies picked through the rubble and pulled out their hair. The skyline was beautiful on fire. All twisted metal stretching upwards. Everything washed in a thin orange haze. I said, "Kiss me, you're beautiful. These are truly the last days." You grabbed my hand, and we fell into it, like a daydream or a fever.
So, we're talking about the decline of America today?
Yep. Yes, we are. A nation that is probably not long for this earth.
Yeah, I really don't think America is going to be here. It's difficult for me to estimate how long it's going to last. It could be gone. I mean, the actual United States, as currently conceived, could be gone in 4 years. I don't think it's going to be that soon. I think it's like maybe a 1% chance it's gone that soon. But somewhere between 4 and 25 years from now, the United States will be different. Either completely dissolved.
The United States is different. It's not the country that we knew in 2019, that's for sure.
No, what I mean is but the polity of the United States will not contain the same territory. It's either going to be there might still be a state or a polity identified as the United States, but it won't have the same territorial claims. Either that, or there will be no polity identified as the United States. It'll be a series of different fractured and balkanized countries, I guess, that are carved up. And I don't know what that's going to do to Canada either. That's difficult to predict as well. But I think that probably any American Civil War would spill over to Canada pretty quickly, because there's a not insignificant amount of conservatives here and people who are into guns and whatever. It's just that most of our population is concentrated in the cities and the suburbs surrounding the cities. So there's a lot of liberals there, but the rest of the country is very it's like bush people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's so weird. It's actually just before we started doing this, I was looking on Vincent James's Telegram channel, and there's footage from Montreal in Quebec of them tearing down the Sir John A. Macdonald statue. And Sir John A. Macdonald was the first Prime Minister of Canada, I believe. I don't even remember. But I think he was the first Prime Minister of Canada. And they're tearing down his statue in Montreal because first of all, because he's a white male, and because he represents Canada as an Anglo-French country, and because he also didn't like Chinese, and he didn't like Indians, and he said as much. And it made me think that because there's no political drive whatsoever to protect these statues, the state has already consented to tearing them all down. The state has already okayed tearing them all down, since we know there will be no deployed forces police or military or otherwise to defend these cultural artifacts, the state has already agreed to pull these statues down. It's as if there was a bill that went through the different municipalities and provincial or state legislatures and going up to a national level, and the bill was to legalize taking down the statues. It's as if that's already been rammed through and signed off by all the appropriate parties. Functionally, that's the case because the state has no will and no drive to protect these things. And it really sunk in actually watching the footage. I didn't watch it. I can't watch it. It just makes my heart hurt too much. But seeing those first few frames playing before I scrolled away, that's kind of what sunk in, is this realization that it really is dead, and the governing authorities have consented to that reality.
Yeah, I think civil war and balkanization are the best case scenario. I think neoliberalism has a few tricks up its sleeve when it comes to holding on to power. Things have definitely escalated this year. I remember back in 2014, I believe, is when Ferguson happened. It was like autumn of 2014.
Yeah, I think so.
That's when the race riots really started. And there weren't any counter-protesters at first. And then in 2016, it became, well, there was the Trump campaign going on, and that was heavily racialized. So Black Lives Matter in 2016 and 2017 kind of morphed into this anti-fascist movement against white nationalism.
It really was a slow burn.
Yeah, and then
what I mean by that,
I don't think we saw very many deaths during these protests. That's a 2020 thing. That's new to 2020. Is now for the first time we're actually seeing the two sides fire weapons at each other. So it's turning violent. As I said, it's an election year. This might die down again after the election, but it's definitely escalated in the level of violence since 2016. So I think we can expect an even more violent 2024 election year. But we'll see. We'll see. For certain, when Trump loses, and it's not entirely clear to me that Trump even wants to win, this might have been part of the plan the entire time, was to create a movement that embodied the last remaining will of white people in America to have a nation and to fight back against neoliberalism, and then sabotage it and destroy it, and then have an election in 2020 where the obvious system candidate, Joe Biden, would win, and it would be cast by the media as a referendum against all the ideas that Trump stood for, and that would be it. Like, conservatism canceled, nationalism canceled, white people canceled. The American people have voiced their opinions and have decided that these things are no longer relevant, and now we have free reign to do whatever we please under neoliberalism with Joe Biden or Kamala Harris or whoever is in power.
I think it's such a funny line about the American people have rejected this, because if there was zero immigrants whatsoever, I don't think it would play out the same way. So this idea that I know you're not actually saying that, but I think to myself that, like, this idea that the American people have rejected this, it's like, no, you took people who are not American and who don't like what the American people themselves represented in 2016. You've moved those foreigners in, and now they're saying they didn't like it. That's not an American rejection of these ideas, but it's like, whatever. The whole thing with Trump, though, is that what I meant when I said it was a slow burn is that Trump actually cast light on everything. Like, as far as I can tell, like, I was 17 in 2012. I turned 17 in 2012, and that was obviously the election between Romney and Obama. And I'm Canadian, but nobody gives a quarter of a damn about Canadian politics here. Like, I don't even know who's running. I don't know who anybody is in Canada. I don't know. everything's Americanized. Whenever there's an election, people are talking about American politics. That's just the way it is. And so that's why maybe it would sound weird for me to talk like this, but it's just the nature of the beast. So in 2012, I was big on Romney's side, I guess. Obviously, I couldn't vote for him, and I didn't know people directly who I could influence to vote for him, but I was nevertheless very much invested in what was going on, and I would consider myself a Romney supporter. Again, I know how foolish that must sound, but still, I did, and I was very much into the whole thing, and I didn't like Obama, but there was no racial element or racial dimension to it. I thought, like the normie conservatives do, but his policies just aren't good for the country. His policies are economically bad, or there's a more efficient way to do things. And that's kind of the trend that I got. Like, there were social conservatives and there were social progressives, and there was the whole thing with gay marriage and all this. And I kind of, after the Romney campaign, I sort of drifted leftward into more of a socialism type thing. I never was an outright Marxist, but there was a period of time where I considered myself very progressive. That only lasted a couple of years before I kind of was like, this is not tenable, this is not intellectually consistent, it doesn't make any sense, But when Trump started to run, he became a lightning rod for all sorts of sentiments that were sort of out there, but that were amorphous. And more than that, he also brought up a lot of issues. Like, illegal immigration was an issue, but it was from what I can tell, it was not an issue of paramount importance. Like, if you talk to a slew of conservatives, but what they cared about, illegal immigration would come up. But it was never like, we need to build a wall and Mexico needs to pay for it and there's an invasion. Like that was not rhetoric that was around. And I mean, obviously, like, I didn't have any IRL, or I guess in real life. I didn't have any in real life people to talk to about this, really, because I was a Canadian. But from the online environment I was in, I didn't get that sensation. Trump came along and everything was immediately about immigration all at once. And consequently, the leftists and the liberals and the progressives, they all said, oh, it's racist, this, that. And that's, I think, what spawned the violence at these rallies, is that Trump, not only did he represent white America, which had been under attack from academia mostly. I don't even think it was a media thing until, there was always propaganda in the movies and TV and stuff, but it was never really so explicit. No,
it was probably early 2015 when we first started seeing the white privilege narrative mainstreamed through minor media sources like BuzzFeed and others. But I also think that anti-immigration sentiment was rising before Trump, because it was late 2014, early 2015 that the migrant crisis was really in the news in Europe. And,
yeah, that's true.
Millions of people flooding in. Horrifying video footage of the number of people pouring across the border. We don't have that anymore. It's pretty much died down, but wow, it was bad in 2014 and 2015. It felt like the end of Europe was like imminent. And, that was starting to bring attention to immigration problems in the U.S. as well.
Yeah, actually, now that you mention that, that's kind of one of the it was two things. It was the migrant crisis, which really started to bother me, and also Trump. But conceiving of America and Europe as being sort of separate entities, I think that Trump became from purely an American. I understand what you're saying when you say that the media was starting to be anti-white pretty explicitly. I would agree with you, but I still think at the time Trump was running, although it was only really starting in the media around that time, academia is where it was really entrenched. And everything that was connected to academia, like kids who just graduated from college, people who were using Tumblr, these college-type people, Reddit, who are all in university, that is sort of, it was oozing out from academia around that time. It was not so much of a cultural force. But I think Trump, when he started to run, again, this is from an American perspective, because I agree with you, actually, when you brought that up. It's one of the things I always forget and I have to remember. That it was two things. It was the migrant crisis in Europe, and it was separate American issues. But it's so weird, because it just seems to have, I don't want to say come out of nowhere, because Trump brought attention to a lot of things. Like, people pouring across the border, the porousness of the border, like those are issues that needed attention drawn to them. But it was because he did that, because he took that action. It was a catalyst for like it accelerated the what would have come later. You probably would have seen what you saw in 2015 and 2016 5 or 8 or 10 years later. Maybe not that late, but I think he definitely accelerated some of that sentiment. And then, because I remember watching in 2015, 2016, the violence at these rallies, the Trump rallies. Like, there was a period of time where if someone found out you were a Trump supporter, if you were a Trump voter, you could get fired from your job. Like, there were stories about people who would dox you and phone your employer and say, this man plans to vote for Donald Trump, and you get fired for that. That was an actual thing.
Yeah.
And like that seems almost inconceivable now, I guess, but that's more to do with the nature of the presidency as opposed to something having gotten better. But it was. I remember being shocked in 2015, 2016, seeing these normal political rallies, normal talking points that had like this idea that America, that you should have a country and it should have strong borders and there should be standards for immigration, not even necessarily racial. I mean, obviously, you and I would agree there has to be a racial standard for immigration, but what was being rejected was the notion of any standard for immigration, like no background checks. You just come across, and that had kind of not been so explicit. It was an understanding coming out of the universities and going through media, and it was becoming this implicit understanding, and that's why there was such a strong leftist backlash, because it wasn't explicit, but it was definitely implicit, and it was definitely real. Excuse me. But it was shocking to see Trump rallies, and people would show up armed with bats and clubs, and old ladies would get like eggs thrown at them or urine thrown at them and stuff. And I remember it was like appalling. You didn't see this in 2012. You just didn't see it. Like with all the things with George Zimmerman and all the things in Ferguson, it kind of died down afterward. And ever since Trump announced and ran, it's basically been constant leftist pressure ever since. You have different events that raise it and fall it, but really it's been a constant. Whenever there's not something happening in the streets, it goes back to the media and this complaining about Trump. And now you and I are not thrilled about Trump per se, but the reason there's constant animus against Trump in the media and in academia is because these people believe that he is a racist. They believe that he stands for white America. And that's why they are attacking him. And it's been constant like that. And it's very weird. And consequently, growing out of that, you get the real sensation. It's a multiplicity of things. Because if it was just a repeat of 2016, I think we would be able to weather it a lot more. But especially with this COVID thing, like everyone is locked down, everyone is wearing masks if they're allowed to go outside. There's a real sensation, and I can't quite put my finger on it, of that the coronavirus plus the all these riots that are worse than they've ever been. Like it said, it feels like this is the end of America. It really does. It feels like this will be the last election America will ever have. And I don't think that that's true per se. I think there's probably got a few more in the tank. But it's really feeling like this is terminal America. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It also makes me think of like the 1960s, because we had a friend that we used to talk to before he got kicked out of our group, and he used to say, "Oh, this is nothing." You know, like there was violence in the 60s and whatever. And it's like, okay, that's true. But even like you can look at different things. You can look at the 60s in America. You can look at the Russian Revolution. You can look at the strife that's happening across the Arab and the Muslim world right now. And none of those things are actually questions of civilization. Nobody is saying, right, that the Middle East is in danger of being destroyed. Like no one is also on the other side saying that the Middle East doesn't have problems. But despite the constant violence and all the chaos that goes on there, that leads to refugees, that leads to violence, that leads to terrorism, that leads to the presidents rising and falling all the time. Despite all the turmoil in the Middle East, it's not, the Arabs aren't going anywhere. It's always in a state of flux and a state of violence, but it's not a question of civilization. There are problems, but it's not a question of civilization. With the Russian Revolution as well, I mean, we obviously have the understanding that it was by and large influenced by Jews. There were other ethnicities that were overrepresented as well, like Latvians. I didn't even know that. But we would say, it was not necessarily a Russian quote-unquote revolution, but it was far more in spite of all the Russian people suffered. I'm not going to say that they didn't suffer, and I'm not going to pretend that there wasn't an ethnic animus by the Jews against Russians and a religious animus by Jews against Christians. I'm not going to pretend that that didn't happen, but it was not a question of Russian existence in the same way. Like, Russia was still there. After the revolution, we would disagree with it on ideological grounds. We would disagree with the regime on ideological grounds, but it was not a question of existence of the Russian state or the Russian people. And that's also true in China. And in both Russia and China, they really strongly, at least initially, suppressed the culture. Like, they wanted... The Soviet Union, for example, didn't see itself as a successor to the Russian Empire. It conceived of itself as international. And despite that, the sheer mass of Russians present there and the presence of all the Russians in the communist institutions, I mean, along with the Jews, but there's a lot of Russians, obviously, meant that there wasn't really a question of Russian language, Russian ethnicity, Russian civilization. That was never really in question. And the Red Guards in China, they also failed. They really wanted to stamp out their own Chinese culture, but they couldn't even do it because there was no ultimate question of Chinese civilization. They still had so many Han Chinese people, and the Han Chinese people organically gave rise to their own culture. So it's not shocking to someone like you or I that the culture would persist. And now it's actually, the pendulum is swinging back the other way in a rebound effect. And now China is basically Strasserist. They're hyper-nationalistic. Like, yeah, they have the red flag, and they got the stars on the flag and everything, and it's, the CCP and all this and that. But they're strongly believers in Chinese culture. Like, guys who try and even demonstrate that certain aspects of traditional Chinese culture are bunk, they get persecuted by the Chinese state. But it's different here, because here it is a question of civilization. The reason that this feels so terminal, especially contrasted with the violence in the 1960s, because that's where I was going with this. The guy that we kicked out of our chat, he was saying that, the violence here is nothing. Okay, granted. We don't have the Weather Underground anymore bombing people. The race riots after the death of Martin Luther King Jr., those were bad. Those were really, really bad. And people, I think, to agree with him partially, yeah, like, the violence is really bad and people forget about that in the modern day. But it was still white America. There was no question of civilization. Nowadays, it's more terminal because since then, we're going through the same violence, but the demographics are different now. The ability of Republicans to get even a nominal conservative in office are shot and destroyed because we've been so thoroughly displaced. So this really is it. You know what I mean? Like, the demographics have shifted. Yeah.
Nobody who witnessed the civil rights movement in the 60s thought, if these guys win, that's the end of civilization. That's it. We're not going to space. We're not. There's no future for white children. But now it's like, it's over. This is it.
They were right in a way. It just took longer than maybe they thought because we still had a bulk of white people, and it took time for the brown masses of the world to actually get here. And while they were coming, obviously this started out when the process began. It was a white supermajority in the country. And the voting power of whites, conservative whites anyway, because white liberals and communists just literally sold out the country. But the voting power of white conservatives was such that they could temper and somewhat slow this process. We're reaching a critical mass of brown people to the point that the violence now is not going to go back down because there's no white population for that to diffuse into. There's no white population to restore order. It's the same brown minority, but they're bigger now, and they know they can get away with more because whites have gotten more liberal and also smaller in size. So there's sure, the violence in the 60s was bad, and nothing came out of the 60s because the country was so white and so conservative still. Both of those things have gone down in proportion seriously, which is why this is so terminal. This is really deadly now.
If neoliberalism wants to, they can lessen the amount of propaganda against white Americans, but continue the demographic shift in the United States, and we'd get something like Brazil, where pretty low average IQ population. Everybody's mixed race except for a small white minority. There's racial violence all over the place, but the government is still able to maintain some level of control over their territory. But it's very different in the United States because we have a level of anti-white propaganda that has never been seen before in history. Like, It's going to be like South Africa over here.
I'd rather be in Brazil now than where America is going.
Yeah,
Because there's a future for white children in
yeah.
Brazil. If you
it's
live in one of the
not
enclaves,
necessarily dangerous to be white in Brazil, but it's going to be dangerous to be white in America in the next couple decades.
it's pretty creepy. It's pretty scary, and it makes obviously I want to join the U.S. Army, and it feels like it's so weird because a lot of this stuff is subconscious and nonverbal, right? This is not someone didn't come to me and tell me the United States is over, sir. It's closed. We're packing up shop. We're going out of business. We're going to be dissolving. But there is a palpable and very tangible sense in my bones that what I want to do, joining the Army, is not going to be possible. I'm not going to be able to move to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan because there won't be a fucking Michigan anymore. It's going to be totally dissolved. And this leads me to another thing. That sense alone is very alarming when I really ruminate on what that means. When I really contemplate and meditate on, hey, you have this sense because your subconscious is taking all these news bulletin points and kind of amalgamating them and digesting them, and you coming to realize, hey, this thing is over. But it's also different from Yugoslavia, and that's important to realize because a lot of people we do that as well. We bandy about the terms balkanization, and less frequently people talk about the dissolution of the Soviet Union. But those are radically different from the American paradigm because now a lot of first of all, the Yugoslavia dissolved violently, but they were all South Slavs. The difference in terms of ethnicity and language is like nil. Croatian and Serbian languages and Bosnian and Slovene, all these things are extremely closely related. They're like Norwegian and Swedish and Danish. This is not like Arabic contrasted with English. And they're all they're not just like speakers. They're the same. Like blacks speak English and whites speak English in the United States, but they're different racially. They're all also ethnically South Slavs, not just linguistically South Slavs, but ethnically South Slavs. And religiously, they were all pretty similar too. I mean, the Bosnians were Muslims. I'll grant that, but the Serbs were Orthodox and the Croats were Catholics. And the difference, really, fundamentally, between the Catholics and the Orthodox is not substantial. I mean, it's there, and you can have tons of debates on the theological issues, but really, compared with other religions, it's not substantial at all. And that was enough where you had concentration camps and widespread abuses and killing people. And moreover, if you actually look, this is really an important thing as well. Looking at the distribution of the population in that area, it was not a complete jumbled mess. There was a Croat minority in Serbia and a Serb minority in Croatia, right? And so they kind of cross-colonized each other, but it was not completely jumbled. When the thing was over, they had a defined Croatian land to go to, and a defined Serbian land to go to, and a defined Bosnian land to go to. In the United States, it's not like that. There are nations and different groups and different ethnicities settled different places in the United States, but over the past few decades, it's become increasingly jumbled.
And that has been done on purpose. Barack Obama, his administration purposefully picked out the whitest communities to send immigrants to. They wanted to mix it up. They didn't want it to be clear they didn't want clear ethnic lines to be present in the United States, and they did it.
That's going to what in a best case scenario, what's going to happen is an India-Pakistan style separation and population transfer. That's another one I like to reference as well, is because India and Pakistan are basically the same people with a difference of religion. And I mean, there was a lot of violence when Pakistan and India separated. So what's going to happen is because you've got blacks all over the north, you've got blacks all over the south, east and west coast, and you've got whites splattered everywhere. Hispanics are mostly concentrated in the southwest, but they're also present everywhere, everywhere. So there's going to be it's going to be very bizarre. It's going to be county by county, subdivision by subdivision, shattering and tension. This will definitely give aid to the leftists because the leftists have a pan-racial message. Now, obviously, I think we would all agree that that's not sustainable. That's not tenable long term. But if they're all unified around get Whitey, get Trump fans, they're probably going to be unified. Sure, they'll fracture and they'll fray later when the communist revolution inevitably fails, as it always does, and the black and Hispanic interethnic rivalries will rear their heads again. But for the time being, all that basically means is that whites are ass blasted and butt fucked. That's not gonna we're screwed. and it's going to be ugly when things start to break down. And people are also, I think, waiting for the big one, right? Like almost a declaration of war. That's not going to happen. What's going to happen is it's going to be a low level. It's going to, like where we are now, it's just going to increase by maybe 20 to 30%. The interstates are mostly going to remain intact. The electrical grid is mostly going to remain intact. We're not going to go ape mode. We're not going to go caveman mode as everything shuts down. It's going to be this weird time where it's going to be very difficult to get people to do anything because no one will really even believe that we're in a civil war. It's going to be low level.
I think it's right now.
Yeah, me too.
We're seeing the start of the low level civil war right now.
But no one realizes that. But it's like literally happening right now. The opening shots of the Civil War have already happened. I used to ask myself back in 2016. I used to say, like, all these boomers for 10 years have been talking and posting their memes about 2 protects 1. And I actually tried to get that going. That was a hashtag I tried to get going back in 2016. It never took off. No one ever posted it besides me, so it wasn't even a minor thing. But I did try to make it happen. I hashtag 2 protects 1 because I saw Antifa beating up Trump supporters, and I was like, hey, Trump supporters, what are you doing? Don't you LARP all the time about having your guns and using them to protect your First Amendment rights? And I didn't see any sort of action. I actually went to a gun shop in the United States. I went to see a girlfriend in Indiana, and one day when I was waiting for her to be free, I was just walking around the neighborhood in Indiana, and I actually came to what are they called? They're like a pretty big gun company, actually. They're in Valparaiso, Indiana. Let me see if I can find what they're called, because people will know them if I mention them. Copper Custom Armament. They run a pretty big YouTube channel. It's got like a few 100,000 subscribers. By sheer chance, I walked into their store that is on Beach Street in Valparaiso, Indiana. I'm looking at the map right now. And I started talking to them about these issues. I started talking to them, a little bit about immigration, but mostly about Antifa, because it was a gun store. And they're all about my Constitution. So I was like, don't you guys talk all the time about having the right to defend your freedom of speech? And that's why the Second Amendment is there to protect the First. So I said, when these guys come armed with batons and clubs and bike locks to smash people in the head, and sometimes firearms of their own, like, what's the deal? Was it just a Minuteman LARP the entire time? And they never really had a good answer, but now we're actually seeing that. Like, conservatives, I think, have started to wake up. But that's well, go ahead.
Before Kyle Rittenhouse, I remember back in 2016, I used to watch a lot of Steven Crowder, and even mainstream conservatives back then often LARPed about what it would take for them to rise up and revolt against the government. And what Steven Crowder said in one of these videos was that his red line when it comes to whether or not a revolution is morally justified is whether or not the government is going door to door and taking guns. Like, so in that case, the Second Amendment is only there to protect itself.
Yeah.
And the government could theoretically, and they have been doing this, repeal all of your other rights. But as long as they keep the Second Amendment in place, they know that you're going to be satisfied and you're never going to do anything. But I think that's starting to change.
Well, I hope so. That was a big fear of mine, is that we're going to make the same mistakes. Is that our numbers, the number of racialists, are too low. And what's going to happen is that the boomers are going to wake up, but they're going to wake up to the wrong thing. And maybe they're going to go full LARP mode. I've spoken to other people who disagree and think the boomers will do jack shit. And they never will. They'll always stay on their ass no matter what happens. And that will allow us to be active, and therefore we won't face any opposition from normie conservatives. And if there is any opposition, it'll be token compared to our large organized masses. Even if the total numbers, even if there's a disparity, I've spoken to people who believe that we will look bigger than we really are because we'll have larger units, more well-trained, and the boomers will be atomized and fragmented. And this includes the Lolberts and the Boot Boys and these types. Now, I don't know how true that's going to be, because a big fear of mine is that really we have, a few 100,000 at absolute best, and they've got 20, 30 million. And a big fear of mine is that they're not going to see this in racialized terms, and they're not going to see this in terms of the American Constitution failed. my big fear is that it's going to be racialized, but they won't see it as such. They'll say, oh, well, all these blacks are just the victim of propaganda, and when we remake America, we'll retain the same immigration laws. We'll just make sure that they love America when they come here, and we teach them about the Constitution, not knowing that even if that was applicable and able to be done, which I would dispute in and of itself, in a few generations it's just going to go back to where it was. My biggest fear is America too, because that leads me to so many other things. Like last night, for example, I was listening to Nick Fuentes talk about this James Younger kid. You know about him?
No.
Okay, he is a little boy. I think he was born of artificial insemination. Some couple or something, or some woman wanted to have a child, and so a man donated sperm, and he's the biological father of this boy who was conceived and born that way. And I don't know the details about his conception and birth or what all that, but he's like 5 or 6 or 7 years old, and the mother, the adoptive mother, believes or is claiming that James Younger is going to transition or needs to transition, right? Like that he's a tranny, and the father says no, he's not, and he's posted video evidence of all this stuff of the boy saying he's identifies as a boy and he wants to play with boys' clothes. Not that we would, believe in that otherwise, even if the boy was claiming he wanted to be a girl. But you know what I'm saying? Like it strengthens it should strengthen the legal case in the current climate that he shouldn't be transitioned. And in Texas, which is supposed to be a conservative state, the courts are siding with this insane adoptive mother and basically mutilating this boy, forcing him to take puberty blockers before he enters puberty, and they're raping this boy basically with the power of the state. And I went and I was listening to my Green Beret songs as I do, and I was thinking, man, there's so much patriotism in these songs, and you can sense and feel the love and fear of God in these songs, right? Like, and I think to myself, how the fuck did this country go from being an upstanding, morally righteous white Christian nation that embodied all these values of family and Christianity and all this stuff to a place where a nominally conservative state like Texas has judges that are going to force puberty blockers down the throat of a 12-year-old boy? That was a serious question that I thought of last night. What?
State-enforced homosexuality.
Yeah, no, but like beyond the meme, I mean that as a serious question. I was like, how did we go? How did American culture like that, rooted in Christianity, rooted in European civilization, how did it arrive at this place? And I thought to myself, for the same reason that everything else is happening, because of free speech, because of people believe in free speech. I don't believe in free speech. Free speech is fucking bullshit. You have the right to make true speech. You have the right to look for truth, but you don't have free speech. Because I thought to myself, like, how did this happen? You got a bunch of leftists agitating in universities, agitating in media companies, agitating in all these places, disseminating their poison that low IQ grug brains or total midwits, the pinnacle of 100 IQ and not a point more, they say, oh, this makes sense to me, not actually perceiving the danger that's therein, because they really do. They lack the ability to properly engage with these ideas. And you get a sizable chunk of enough people convinced of something that's total bunk, total bullshit, and absolute poison, and then that's how you get it. And I was like, so my biggest fear is that in America too, these boomers are going to enshrine their, my free speech. That's sacrosanct. You can't do anything about that. And then that combined with this lack of true racial awareness is going to just cause America to cycle at absolute best. We're going to have, repeats into eternity of America getting sicker and getting better and getting sicker and getting better. As a good, that's in the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is this is the only time it happens. There's one cycle and then it's totally butt fucked and it turns into, Mordor. Forever. You know what I mean? Like that's why I wanted to talk about the decline of America, because America fucked itself. Like, yeah, I get it. Okay, the Soviet Union collapsed first. That's just because communism is totally unworkable. But so long as those ideas are percolating in an otherwise healthy society, it's terminal. Like, I think to myself, if you got found out that you were a capitalist sympathizer or an American sympathizer or supporter in the Red Army or the KGB, they'd probably, there was a point in time they'd just fucking kill you. Stalin would have you killed. After some of the reforms in the mid-20th century, you'd probably be removed from the army and thrown in prison. And in America, and I get it, the Soviet Union did collapse first. That just highlights the degree which communism is untenable. But in America, there was some kid who was at West Point or whatever, and he revealed that he had a "Communism Will Win" shirt underneath his dress uniform, and the Department of the Army or whatever department was governing this was, their hands were tied, because the privates, the recruits, the students, they all have the right to the freedom of speech. They have the right to believe whatever they want. You know what I mean? At least nominally. And of course, as the left exerts its political influence, that's just simply less true for the right and more true for them. But that's only they were only able to achieve that by the right's leave. Because you get an Antifa guy who says, "Oh, well, you were racist in uniform. You're a National Socialist in uniform, and so you're in jail now and you're banned." And when the tables are turned, you get these normie conservatives who say, "Let me reference the Constitution. Ah, yes, First Amendment. You have a right, Private Lenin, to be a communist in our army." And so inherently you're going to lose ground to the leftist authoritarians that way. You know what I mean? Free speech is bullshit. It kills. It's suicidal, because people aren't smart enough to really live. Free speech is unnecessary in a society where everyone is wise enough to know the truth, and dangerous in a society where everyone is too stupid to do that. It's either unnecessary or dangerous.
And I think the American population was smart enough at one point. It's estimated that in the 1700s that's kind of when the average IQ of Europeans was at its peak at like 115, and that's when we saw the rise of liberalism. And maybe that's because that system can be sustained with a population with an average IQ of 115, but we're no longer there. We're no longer there at all. And
I think that I think that you obviously can't dismiss all speech, right? But so I shouldn't say that like free speech should be banned, but it should be banned in its current conception, because there's obviously room for debate. You need to be able to have discussions and debate. But what we should have in place is certain ideas that are identified as banned, like communism. Certain things that are known to be false, certain things that are known to be damaging, those are off the table of discussion. Things like communism, things like egalitarianism, those are known to be false. Just in the same way that you can demonstrate that 1 + 1 does not equal 2, you know what I mean? Or does not equal 3. In the same way you can demonstrate that. Any philosophy that can be demonstrably shown to be retarded needs to be taken off the table. There needs to be room for speech, obviously, because people need to have discussions and work out problems. But the license to free speech is not universal. It doesn't apply to every idea. If your idea is bullshit, it's off the table. You know what I mean? Like this idea that, we can't know what's true. No one can know what's true. No one can legislate what's true. That itself is not true. We know, we can figure out when things are a bad idea. And, even if you want to get all epistemological and philosophical on me, say, really, we can't know. We have to deal in practicalities. We have to draw a red line somewhere. Or else we get this shit. We get the United States turning into a fucking shithole with no hope. Yeah, I wonder how many of these boomers, how many of these conservatives would even be constitutionalists if they were born in another country. If they were all, because Canadians have a reputation. I'm not one of these people, but Canadians have a reputation for snickering and scoffing at the American way of doing things. You believe in guns, but you don't believe in healthcare. That's a total meme up here. Canadians love to feel smug. They love to feel superior to Americans. They love to feel enlightened compared to Americans, which always has ground my gears. But if all the Americans were born in Canada, to what degree would that be true of those people who right now are in love with the Constitution, or if they were born in Nazi Germany or the Soviet Union? Are they? I think that a lot of these boomers don't even really believe in the Constitution itself. They believe in the Constitution because they're born in America, and their natural nationalistic, patriotic instincts were applied to the country of America, and kind of almost they were looking for something to latch onto, and it just happened to latch onto the Constitution. Most of them don't actually believe in the Constitution because they've been shown or convinced that it's a worthy cause to fight for. They believe in the Constitution is a proxy for their race, for their people.
Right, and that's how it is with most people. They subscribe to whatever the dominant ideology is when they're being raised, and that'll never change. But
I guess I don't know, man. The country's so fucked.
Yeah.
I don't even know. I don't even know what's going to happen when things do get really bad. When the United States withdraws from the world stage, that fighting is going to spread to Canada, and it's going to spread to Europe. America recedes, and you're going to see riots in Europe, I think, because I just think because America is such a cultural hegemon and such a cultural force that if it's projecting the idea of riots and the idea of rage, that happened with the non-whites in Europe, for example. I think if America collapses into civil war, something's going to happen. First of all, there's too many indications that the German military are waiting for that. That there's a lot of our guys who have infiltrated the German military, and they're waiting for something. And that something probably has to be the collapse of the United States, because they always seem to be in there, but they never seem to do anything. And I've been trying to figure out what it is they're trying to do. And then I think it just hit me one day, because if they tried to stage a revolution in Germany, they're going to have all the weight of NATO, led by the United States, bearing down on them. Like the American army would not tolerate neo-national socialism in Germany. So what I think they're waiting for is America to fully collapse, and then the rioting is going to spread in Germany, in France, in the UK, all these places, Spain, Italy. It's going to spread, and then you're going to have that. But America will be off the world stage. So what do we see? I think the Russians, they have a limited ability to project power, but I think they're going to try and get the former stuff in the Soviet Union. Like, they're going to take over Belarus. They're going to try and take over all of Ukraine, maybe the Baltics, Kazakhstan, for example, maybe some of those other South Asian countries. To whatever degree they're able to project power, I think they're going to try and do that and be kind of a new cultural hegemon. I don't think they have desires to rule the world, because I don't think that they have the ability to. I think their military is cognizant of that. They just want to be a regional power. China, on the other hand, I mean, they're probably a paper tiger compared with the United States. I think the United States would have a tough time invading China, but I think in terms of actual ability to win a war, I think China is still a paper tiger compared with the U.S. But once the U.S. is gone, all the infrastructure work and the financial work they've been doing in Africa and across Southwestern Asia, like, they're going to become a rising power. And I think both Russia and China may try and influence both sides of any strife in the United States. Probably both leftists and rightists are going to receive some sort of clandestine support or funding from both of these governments. And another big thing is, like, okay, that's Russia, that's China. A big thing is the Middle East then. I don't know what the Middle East is going to do, because there are too many regional power players. I know the Turks, they want to reform the Ottoman Empire. They want a pan-Islamicist group, and they want the Turks to be at the head of that. And they've been colonizing Europe forever with Turks and with other Muslims, and they actually use migrants as a weapon against Greece and as against these other countries. And we know that they have neo-Ottomanistic plans, that they have these ideals. This is a specific word I want to use, but it's escaping me right now. They have these neo-Ottoman ideas, and so if America collapses and Europe is thrown into civil war and riots and civil strife, I don't know what the Turks are going to do, because it's not just the Turks. They're counterbalanced by many other powers in the region, like the Saudis, who have a bad relationship with the Turks because of the history of the Ottoman colonization in the area. The Saudis also want to project power, but it's not just the Saudis. Every single one of the Gulf states distrusts the other, basically, and they dislike each other. And it's not just the Gulf states, it's Iran, which is a major Shiite power in the region, and counterbalances all the Sunni powers. And of course, the elephant in the room, Israel. What are they going to do? So the entire Middle East is a powder keg, and it actually extends contiguously eastward. And then you've got this question of, okay, well, now the white world is in chaos. You know, are India and China, or are India and Pakistan, are they going to finally trade blows? Like that, people in America and Europe, they don't really think about India and Pakistan the way India and Pakistan conceive of each other. Without international pressure, are they going to, go full out? What will China's reaction be? Because China doesn't want India to rival them as a power, and I really don't think India will ever beat China. I think China will totally choke the life out of India, and they'll make sure to do that because they're the most obvious competitor to them. But, as far as China is concerned, how are they going to handle Pakistan? Is China going to use Pakistan as a pit bull to throttle India? Like, what's going to happen? And what's going to happen with Australia and New Zealand, these backwater white countries in the middle of nowhere? Like, there's a lot of these things that I don't know what's going to happen. People LARP and they have this idea about, it's going to be a worldwide white revolution. But that's so short-sighted. That's so myopic. Like, okay, great. You're thinking about the United States. You're thinking about Europe. That's so amazing, dude. But what about the powder keg that is the Muslim world that's kept in check by Western pressure? What about India and Pakistan? What about China? What about Japan? Is Japan going to remilitarize? What about North Korea and South Korea? What is the world going to look like? What about Taiwan? Nobody considers any of these angles, any of these things, and I really don't know what the world is going to look like even 30 years from now.
No.
Like, think about the 20th century. Like, we started the 20th century with empires. The British Empire, we had I don't know if France had an empire, it was like a republic that was colonizing things, but we had the British Empire, the Russian Empire, the German Empire, and then we went through the Third Reich and the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union collapsed within a century. Like, we had the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union, and then the Russian Federation within 100 years. So what's going to happen in the 20th century? Like, the year 2000 resembles the year 1900 in no way whatsoever at all. And, like, you know, like, what's going to happen in, even because of the accelerating pace of technology and the accelerated movements of different races and people groups around the world, you know, like, what's the world going to look like 20 years from now, 30 years from now? It might even be unrecognizable.
I'm not concerned about Turkey. I don't think Russia would allow an imperialist Turkey. So I think the world without the United States as a superpower would see probably Iran ruling the Middle East, and Israel would be gone so fast. Like, who's gonna protect Israel when we're gone, dude?
I think they're just going
Have
to
they
nuke
thought
the
of
entire
that?
thing.
Have they thought of that? I don't know.
I think Israel is going to nuke the entire Middle East if we're gone, because you have to ask yourself, okay, well, who? This is I've said this countless times. I say, why do the Jews do this? Why do they always push these things? Like, I've said this, I think, a few podcasts ago. I said, like, why are the Jews doing this? Because they had in us patrons. If they got out of World War II, they had the sympathy of the white world, and all of a sudden, nobody wanted to make anti-Semitic jokes. Nobody wanted to make anti-Semitic canards, so-called, and nobody wanted to be anti-Semitic. It was in vogue. It was fashionable to believe the Jews because of the Holocaust. They escaped by the skin of their teeth, right? And it's like, and so what's the response there? Instead of saying, okay, we exist as a people, let's continue to do, let's profit in a healthy, sustainable, long-term way. What do they do instead? They flood all the countries with communist ideology and with non-white migrants, and they literally, this struggle that I'm talking about was induced by them. So this idea that it's a suicide with extra steps doesn't make sense to me. I think what probably they want to do is they probably want to rule in the way that we've talked about, where they want to have this imperialistic class that rules over coffee-colored people that are just smart enough to run the machines, but not smart enough to throw up a legitimate challenge to them. So what does that look like? Well, I think that must mean, therefore, that Israel has to deal with its immediate neighbors, because that's the most pressing threat. Without America to back them up, you're right, the Muslims are going to want to wipe Israel off the map. They have to be cognizant of that. They have to be. And so anything, like when you realize what they're doing in Europe, what they're doing in America, that necessarily comes along with an understanding that they have a contingency plan in place for when their protectors that they love to abuse are gone. What does that mean? I think that means that Iran, Iraq, Syria, they're all turned into fucking craters. They're probably going to nuke Turkey, nuke Iraq, and then they have probably designs on a greater Israel, and anything outside of that is turned to absolute glass. And I think that they're going to want to rule. I don't know if they're going to want to rule from America or what, but they're going to rule from somewhere. And a lot of what they don't need is going to be nuked. And yeah, that's the only way I can really see it, because they had to have known that going in. They know that the Muslims don't like them. You know, like Jews and blacks have had a bad relationship, even going back to Jews have pushed a lot of pro-black stuff, but the blacks have never been completely devoid of anti-Jewish sentiment. So they all have to do this with some sort of design in mind. They have to know what's coming, which makes me think that they've got a plan for it, or it would just be suicide. You know?
Yeah, I think there will be nuclear exchanges in the Middle East in the 21st century. I doubt we'll see nuclear exchanges between the West and China. I don't think we have the balls, and I think China knows that. I think China is starting to realize that they can get away with whatever they want in their corner of the world militarily, and I think they're going to start claiming territory that doesn't currently belong to them, and I think there will be nothing that we can do about it. Whether or not there will be conventional warfare between the West and China is yet to be seen, but I don't think nukes will ever be exchanged.
I don't think there's conventional warfare coming between the West and China. And the reason I say that is because the United States itself is not going to survive the next 2 to 3 decades based on internal civil strife alone. The idea of a unified American fist smashing China is not going to happen. The country is fraying at the seams. It could dissolve earlier than either of us have predicted. Like, the riots could get out of hand this election. Like, that's what I was saying to one of
what's crazy to think about is, and this just hit me just now, is the kind of rhetoric that I see from normie Trump supporters online. They think that they have this election locked down. Like, they think that there is overwhelming support for Trump, and that if the election is fair, he's going to win in a landslide. They actually think that. But they also think that chances are Joe Biden is going to get in through fraud. They think that there's some kind of coup going on. And I have to wonder how they're going to react to Trump losing. Are they actually going to... is that going to be the catalyst for more of them to be going out and shooting Antifa?
I don't know. I really don't know. This election is so crazy because it still feels so far away to me, but it's not. It's 60 days away. It's 2 months away. It's crazy, man. I'm thinking either way, shit gets real. Here's my kind of perspective. I think Trump has better chances than you particularly think that he does. I don't think his chances are as great as the normies do, but I think his chances are probably better than what you would have conceived of. But that's splitting hairs. It's not really a serious thing. Because either way, like, okay, look at what happened in 2016. We went from a relatively peaceful time. Like, yeah, we had Ferguson, but that, like, it died down. It wasn't a continuous talking point. Like it was, but it wasn't. It's I
don't think public support for Trump or Biden is what is going to decide this election. Because of the coronavirus, like, there are so many different factors that are going to be in play insofar as who the hell is actually motivated enough to go out and vote. Like, it's a different process now, and that means a lot of people are just not going to participate because they don't have the agency to go out and do that. But yeah, it's up in the air, I think.
Well, where I was kind of going with everything is, like, okay, so really the country was relatively peaceful in, like, 2012, at that sort of time. There was Ferguson, but it was really localized. It was in Missouri, and then there was the Freddie Gray thing in Baltimore, and that was there. And it was not like a nationwide thing. But in 2016, when Trump won, there were riots all over the country. There was, like, looting and burning, and for a while there, it looked really bad. It did calm down, but for a while, it looked really, really bad after Trump won the election. It was crazy. And I'm thinking, like, okay, well, what happens if Biden wins? Okay, if Biden wins, they're going to look the other way, as they already have. Like, it's going to be the Democrat, like, what they're doing in these different states, in these different cities, is going to be applied nationwide. Nationwide, look the other way. And I think that the BLM and the Antifa, they're going to be emboldened by that. But if Trump wins, there's going to be riots either way. But they're already galvanized by the fact that they're out there right now. They're out there right now. They're upset in the middle of election season. Then they're not even rioting about the election because coronavirus has basically shut everything down. It's about George Floyd and these other blacks that were killed or whatever. And they're out there right now, and it's going to be going straight up. And as the election comes closer and closer, the thought of Trump is only adding fuel to that fire that's already burning. And if Trump wins, it's going to be all that, like it's a self-feeding fire. The more the riots go on, like, sometimes it burns itself out, but when there's fuel to add to it, it can actually almost become exponential in terms of strength and growth. And so if Trump wins, in spite of all their rioting, it's going to make them even angrier, because you see where I'm going with this? Like, if the Democrats win, the Democrats will turn a blind eye and the riots will continue and the anti-white agenda will thunder on unabated, and it's going to be bad enough. But if Trump wins, all of their rioting that they've done so far, they're going to say to themselves, I know that they're not actually looking for someone to quote unquote listen, but they're just looking for an excuse to riot and be anti-white. I get that. But at the same time, if Trump wins, they're going to say, this is all for naught. America's more racist than ever. No one's listening to us. No one's doing anything. And that's going to make it so much worse. It would be bad enough if if George Floyd and all these other blacks never, engaged with the police to begin with. But they did. And now we're riding on the back of this into the election. And regardless of what, if Trump wins, it's going to make it so much worse. We're going to riot if Trump wins anyway. But you know what I mean? This is inherently exponential. It's going to go bananas, and there's no break either. There's no riots, then it dies down, and the riots have to build back up in strength again. It's got momentum. You know what I mean? It's got momentum, and more momentum will be added to it. If and when Trump wins again.
It's crazy to think about. It's crazy to think about, but the election is just over 2 months away. And the amount that has happened politically in the past 2 months is just insane. It was 2 months ago that the BLM riots first started back up again after who was it first? Was it the truck guys that killed that jogger in Georgia? I don't think there were riots after that. What was the first one to fall?
George Floyd.
Was it George Floyd that kicked it all off?
Yeah, it was.
Okay. So, yeah, it was about 2 months ago that the George Floyd thing started all those riots. And at first, Black Lives Matter had overwhelming support from white Americans. Not just liberals, but the majority of conservatives found themselves on the side of the protesters. And now, in just this past 2 months, it has gone back to where we would have expected it to be in 2016, where pretty much all white conservatives have recognized that George Floyd and all these other shootings, all these riots have been based on lies, and they've gone back to their default position of not taking the side of Black Lives Matter. Now, in the next 2 months, if things continue to escalate, if the election becomes even more racialized than it already is, I wonder if now Trump would have to actually his rhetoric would have to start to reflect this. He hasn't even been as racial with his rhetoric as he was in 2016. But if he wanted to win in a landslide, if he wanted the support of white America once again, he would have to he'd come out in support of Kyle Rittenhouse. That would be a start. But
here's what I don't get.
Things have happened in the past 2 months, and more things could happen in the next 2 months. We'll have to see.
Trump has so much power. Like, how has he forgotten? He called for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. He was dropping red pills on Mexican rape statistics. What happened to this guy? It reminds you of the Joker. It's like, what happened? Your balls drop off? It's like, seriously, what actually happened? That he gained American support doing that? Like why doesn't he say about Kyle Rittenhouse, especially with a case as black and white as that? Where's the rhetoric? Where's the strong Trump? Like, he knows, doesn't he know that he can get away with rhetoric about like that about Mexicans, about Muslims? So like, he knows there's a threshold, and that's how he garnered his initial support. So why doesn't he go up to that, or at least go up to that, and certainly go less than that? And moreover, the people who hate him already hate him. They already think he's Hitler. They already think that he's racist. They already think that he, in some way, is responsible for George Floyd's death. Oh, this is Trump's America. He was so racist, and then blacks and they're being killed. They already hate him. What does he have to lose? And you know what Trump
is saying in response to that? He's saying this is Joe Biden's America. He points to the protests going on right now while he is in power and saying this is Joe Biden's America. Like,
what is wrong with it? Like,
you are the president. Do something.
Sometimes I wonder about these fucking White House aides. You know what I'd like to do if I was in the White House? I would go in and I would pull a Trump on Trump. I would actually more Trump than Trump. I'd say, Mr. President, what the fuck are you doing? I would talk like that. And he'd say, I'll get him out of here. I don't have to listen to this. I'd say, Mr. President, no. And I would say exactly what I'm saying to you. You have the support of the people. You garnered the support of the people. When you're talking about shithole countries, you're talking about Mexican rapes, and you're talking about illegal immigration, the wall, Mexico's going to pay for it. We have a big problem with Muslims in the country, all this stuff. You garnered your initial support talking like that, and they hate you anyway. Why are you so afraid to restore law and order? This is what the community is begging for. You know what I mean? Trump, I don't know what happened to Trump. Why doesn't he go Caesar mode? Why doesn't he go dictator mode? It would be so epic. I remember there was this alt-hype video where he was talking about civil war and what happens as things start to fray. And he started basically to talk as if there would be a military coup. It's like Trump in the middle military, epic handshake alliance mode, and they would say fuck you to the courts and the Congress and say, we have the guns, floss your teeth with my fucking goo chairs. And Trump has 0% of that in him. And I don't know what happened. He has no balls. What happened to him though? How did this he used to go up on stage and talk about, remember he said to Hillary Clinton on the debate stage, because you'd be in jail. You remember that? What happened to I'm convinced at this point that they killed him and they replaced him with a Flash clone, out of Halo or something. I don't even know what to make of it. I wish Trump was the authoritarian the leftists think he was. I wish he would sit in the Oval Office and be surrounded by yes men and sycophants and sack all the generals, go full Stalin, and purge all the generals and replace them with political appointees and tell them to go down into Chicago, into Kenosha, into fucking Minneapolis, and machine gun all the leftists. This is what he said. Remember he said he could walk down Fifth Avenue and point a gun at someone's head and shoot them, and he wouldn't lose any support. Did he forget about that?
But does he not know what's at stake for him? If Joe Biden wins, they are going to want to completely embarrass the entire. They want to completely embarrass every Trump supporter, and they're gonna go straight back to Russian collusion, and they're going to find all these unconstitutional things, supposedly unconstitutional things that he did throughout his presidency, and he's not getting a pardon. They're going to investigate it. And then they're going to throw his ass in prison for the rest of his life. Does he not know this?
I sometimes think that the only real explanation, the Flash clone thing was a joke, but the only real explanation is that he got in, and on day one, he probably wanted to. Well, I don't know. First of all, I don't know if you remember this, but in 2016, when he was running and he won the election, his rhetoric dialed way down. It was way down even in 2016.
January 2017. I'm a nationalist and a globalist.
No, but this was even before he got in office.
January 2017.
He won the election, and it was in that time between where there's a term for this, but it was after the election but before the inauguration, and all his rhetoric dialed way down, and there was a period of time like in that summer of 2016, before the election, his rhetoric had been going down. We had an epic moment on the debate stage where he said he'd throw Hillary Clinton in jail, but that was it. That was the last little bit of resurgence. All the wall talk, all this stuff, basically went out the window. And the only thing I can think of, like, what happened, because he was like anally raping all the other Republicans on stage with his rhetoric. So he should know that wins. But he dropped it off. So, like, what's the explanation here? Did he basically get kind of semi-Epsteined? Like, did some guy come up to him and say, like, hey, okay? Because they started to get briefings on stuff, I'm pretty sure, in the late stage of the election. I'm pretty sure they start to get, like, security briefings and stuff. So, like, he probably was informed by someone. Someone probably came and paid him a visit and said, look, we know everything that's going through your mind right now. We know you're thinking of ways to talk to the public right now. But trust me, we have contingencies for all of them. And we will make sure that every single one of your family members has something absolutely horrible happen to them unless you do what we say. That's the only real explanation. That they would kidnap Barron and make him a tranny or something through some sort of way. Like they'd be slipping him estrogen pills in his food or something. And Melania would suffer some sort of weird bone cancer all of a sudden. And that, I don't know what they threatened him with. And it's probably not even scientific. It's probably magically induced. They probably contact actual demons in order to make sure that whatever they want to happen to these people actually happens. And that's the only thing I can think of. And I know that sounds insane. I know that sounds kooky, but it's the only thing I can think of. Why else is he such an emasculated beta male at this point? Like, where did his fucking balls go? You know, like, I think there actually may be a very real, very dark, sinister. Because these people, and I don't want to get too morbid here.
Lose. He's gonna be punished if he loses. So, I don't know, man.
I wish I could sit down with Trump.
I know he has phone calls, at least weekly, probably, with Alex Jones, because Alex Jones talks about these phone calls that he has with the president all the time, and Alex Jones says that he tells the president about what they're going to do to him, and he tells them what the real shot is, and that he tells them, I don't know, it just feels like the guy is actively working against his own self-interest, and it doesn't make any sense.
Tell me that you haven't thought about being the president, and you imagine what you do day one. Probably you do a bunch of based in red pilled things day one, or at least you'd be a real guy and you'd do what we thought Trump would do, where he would show up in front of the camera and say, "Fuck this person, fuck this congressperson, fuck this judge. He's obstructing." That's what I thought Trump was going to do. That's what I would do if I was president. I would absolutely say, "This person." I probably wouldn't be swearing, but I'd say, "This person is obstructing me," and I would talk like that, and I would go,
"Just be 100% honest with the American people." Like,
yeah, at all times. Like, that's what everybody kind of thinks.
If some federal agents show up before at some security brief and threaten your entire family, your next move should be to tweet about it or to get on TV and say, "Yo, Epstein's threatening me with X, X, and X. I never did any of that stuff. Just a heads up."
Yeah, like if I was president, I would walk into the place with a hidden microphone on or a hidden camera on. And so everything would be recorded and it'd just be immediately tweeted out to the whole world.
Total Richard Nixon mode. Record everything.
Honestly, dude, it's fucking weird. But at the same time, it's like think about what, like, these people who do, I don't know, I know this has been kind of a lighthearted talk in spite of all the subjects that we're talking about, but like these people capture and mutilate and torture children for spiritual purposes. They are in league with very powerful demons. And I'm sure that they're not doing that just for shits and giggles. I'm sure that they are using that to cement their power somehow. And I'm sure that actual demons, real-life demonic entities, are part of the reason why Trump seems so emasculated. Trust me, I know how insane that sounds. That sounds off the walls. But for someone like Trump, who is so strong and railed against the political establishment, you got that on one side. And then you've got on another side, you've got the reality of Trump in office, which is total cuckery, as it relates to absolutely everything. And you've got this third dimension, the fact that we know that the elites are doing this to children to contact demonic entities because they're power hungry. So, you know, we've got these three variables. We got pre-Trump and post-Trump and this demonic shit in the middle that the enemies of the white race and goodness and Christianity are doing specifically to increase their own power. So, I mean, you tell me what's going on.
And I mean, this has been exposed. Like, everybody knows about it. Everybody knows that all of our elites are satanic pedophiles. And, you know, the Q movement has actually taken off. It's become a thing in normie conservatism. Like, they think that there are agents working in the government to save America from the elite pedophiles. This is a normie conservative thing now. There are congressmen with election campaigns running on their support for Q, and they're winning. And like, this is a thing. Trump has the authority to act on these ideas, and hell, he was even asked during a press conference. When was this? Last week? 2 weeks ago? To comment. He was asked to comment on the Q theory that he is secretly trying to save America from an elite pedophile ring. And he said, I haven't heard that, but is that supposed to be a bad thing? And it's like, okay, now do something about it.
I don't know, man. I want to trust the plan so bad, but really I just don't see a reason to right now. Like, I would totally compromise everything. I'm not one of these autistic LARPers who's like, oh, no. It needs to be like exactly as the NSDAP did it 70 years ago. It's like, if Trump is going to build the wall and he's going to do a whole bunch of good stuff and limit immigration, I would be so on board for that, dude. Like, I would not be upset. It would be huge first steps. That's actually a prerequisite to doing everything else. People are putting the cart before the horse. I think I said this before. People are putting the cart before the horse with everything right now. It's just absolutely crazy. But I don't know, man. Like all this demonic stuff. It's so weird. It makes me think of what I said earlier the other day when I was talking about how anything happens to any black guy anywhere, and people are in the streets rioting, tearing down national statues, national monuments, and like this Kyle Rittenhouse kid gets arrested, and nobody. Did you listen to that VM that I sent? And I talked about this.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, and I said, like, with the conservatives, what did I say? I phrased it in such a way. I said, we can't go Tarrant, we can't go Roof, we can't go Charlottesville, because what's the conventional wisdom is that if we try and have a mass movement, like if 500 armed white nationalists showed up at anywhere, the FBI, the ATF, the army would get called in, and it would be totally squashed. And we would have no support from the conservatives because we're too small. We're not a major political force. We're, only kind of big online. That's it. We have no real support. But I said, with the conservatives, there are millions of conservatives, and like when someone pulls a Roof, when someone pulls a Tarrant, they lose a conservative support. That pits conservatives against our ideas. It's totally counterproductive. But
I don't know.
I totally think it is counterproductive. Like, how many people?
I mean, we saw the activation of Boomerwaffen after Tarrant. They loved it. They loved what happened in New Zealand. Of course, they couldn't be super explicit about it, but they loved it.
Well, at least Roof. Then they were not fans of Roof.
No.
You have to choose your. I guess, targets carefully, I suppose. But like, that's not what I'm talking. As a general rule of thumb, going Saint mode does not really work out that well. There's a lot of backlash, and even with Tarrant, if the boomers implicitly support that sort of a thing, it's not explicit, okay? But what I wish happened, and I'm saying all of this with the understanding that it didn't happen, but with Kyle Rittenhouse, what they should have done, because the boomers have such a large population to draw from, they have the entire Trump base to draw from, they have the entire Second Amendment crowd to draw from, they should have been the ones outside the governor's mansion pulling a reverse Antifa and armed with guns. They should have been out when the district attorney threw the book at Kyle Rittenhouse. They should have been outside the district attorneys. Like, Antifa shows up outside major people's homes. Tucker Carlson, Mitch McConnell. These are major media and political figures, and Antifa will show up outside their house. And if white nationalists did that, we would get creamed by the FBI. But if normies did that, if it was a normie movement of Second Amendment people, like that, there would be no normie backlash against it because it would be them. They have a much larger pool to draw from, and it's also much harder to squash them with the power of the state because there are millions and millions of them as opposed to us. And we would it's so funny because this is just inherently true. Any Second Amendment thing, any normie conservative thing that is obviously done as against the state and against Antifa gets our support automatically. Like this Kyle Rittenhouse kid, he was probably not our guy. He was probably not a groyper. He was probably not some guy online or whatever who was a white nationalist or whatever, but he gets all the white nationalist support by default. It's the same thing with that Second Amendment rally in Virginia a few months ago. Like, there were people who were complaining about it, obviously, because it's too cringe or whatever. But as a general rule, it attracted more of our support organically and naturally. So what I have always kind of said over the past week, I guess, not always, but over the past week, needs to happen is there needs to be a normie conservative backlash. The boomers need to show up outside the DA's office. The boomers need to show up outside Anderson Cooper's subdivision. The boomers need to go outside, Democratic mayor and governor's houses with their guns and pull a reverse Antifa. I'm not saying they need to be violent. I mean, that would be epic if they were, but I'm not saying they need to be violent, but there needs to be a presence on the street. That would get our support automatically. And I say we racialize from there. I'm not guaranteeing that would even be successful because the boomers are very much resistant to these sorts of ideas. But at least there would be a presence on the street, and it would invariably fall along racial lines. The boomers may not be cognizant of race, even as it falls along racial lines, and the country frays along racial lines and cracks that way, but it would be inherently and immediately split along racial lines, by and large. And
the boomers wouldn't be around for very long to sabotage it.
What?
And the boomers won't be around much longer to sabotage that kind of thing.
We need them to actually, but this is the sad thing, is that they're not doing anything. There are no boomers outside. The best we had was Kyle Rittenhouse. Kyle Rittenhouse was it. The boomers no one went to surround the DA. The DA threw the book at Kyle Rittenhouse, and no one went to the DA's house with guns, armed, intimidating her. No one did that. I think it was a female DA. No one did that, and that's the sad thing. So that's what the boomers. I went through that whole spiel, and I ended off by saying the boomers should be doing that, but they're not. And so our hands are tied. We need them to do something first. We've tried with Charlottesville. People have tried with the whole Saints thing, and it doesn't really work. We never garner the mass support because we need them to make the first move, and we racialize from there. And this is textbook. I hate these fucking boomers, man, so much with their fucking Jefferson memes and, the tree of liberty needs to be watered with the blood. Shut the fuck up. You're not doing anything. You don't have to go and assassinate the goddamn DA, but at least pull a reverse Antifa and show up outside that gated community, that subdivision, or her place of work in the middle of the day with guns, with rifles, and say, free Kyle Rittenhouse now. And, okay, sure, maybe they'll call in the troops. And everyone can complain about how hypocritical it is, whatever. But if it was a mass movement of people, we would get stomped out if we tried that. If we gathered every white nationalist, national socialist, paleo-conservative, race realist in the country and tried that, we would be destroyed by the FBI. But if every Second Amendment person, or at least enough of them, and Trump supporter, Bannonite, these types of people, they have such a large pool to draw from.
It's not like they've never done it. It's not like they've never done it. I know so much has happened in 2020. It's easy to forget that the big thing in February was red flag laws, and the number of people who went out and protested that, the number of armed Second Amendment guys who walked into state capitol buildings with their weapons, that was pretty impressive. I was impressed by that. Of course, they weren't going to do anything, but they marched 100 people with their weapons out into a state capitol building. That's something. So it's
kind of like a
why don't you go out and do it in defense of the First Amendment? But no.
I'm not saying they need to go and have that. That's basically the armed version of a hippie sit-in. Because you're right, they were never going to do anything. What I'm talking about is they need to go, because that's inherently toothless. But they need to go to the DA's home at 3 a.m. and shine lights into her house. And they need to do that outside of Anderson Cooper and university professors, some of these really nasty professors. They need to start doing that. I'm not saying they have to be assassinated Hunter style. I'm not saying that.
Alex Jones has done this recently.
That's good
with people whose businesses have been shut down because of coronavirus, and some of these people have refused to shut their businesses down, and they've been arrested. And Alex Jones has shown up at the mayor's house and at law enforcement's places a meeting in residence with protesters, and he in the middle of the night with a speaker. But yeah, this
That's
stuff
good,
works.
then.
I mean, Antifa does it all the time. You have these normie liberals in power, and they get bullied by progressives, and Antifa bullies the progressives and keeps everybody on the anti-white message. We should be doing the same thing. The alt-right should be, or for lack of a better term, should be bullying the alt-light, and the alt-light should be bullying normie conservatives into getting our agenda through. But of course, Antifa has the backing of the system, and we don't.
That's I think it. That Antifa acts like they're such rebels, but they're not. They get off. Like, that's kind of why I said it needs to be normie conservatives and a lot of boomers, because that would overwhelm the system. But at the same time, Antifa is really spurred on, not only by numbers, but by the system not doing anything. You know what I mean? Like, if the boomers tried that, it would be probably limitedly successful, but there'd be a lot of arrests, there'd be a lot of state pressure, and what I said earlier about the numbers would certainly help. It would certainly be harder to squash, but at some point the rubber meets the road. Like, Antifa doesn't get in trouble. They don't really face state pressure. There's maybe a limited response from police, and the police get owned, and then they don't do anything. With us, yeah, it would be harder to squash than a true blue white nationalist movement that's out on the streets, because we would attract limited numbers, and that's more easy to contain. Even with more numbers with the boomers, they're not going to treat us with kid gloves. And great, okay, we can't be squashed by sheer numbers, but the shooting is going to start eventually. You're going to have to open fire on troops, on police, on enforcers of the state, you know what I mean, in a way that Antifa doesn't really have to. The state offers token resistance only to them.
Yeah.
It's not just numbers.
Just for reasons of safety, we of course don't endorse that. We just say that's where the country's heading.
Yeah, that's where it's heading. No one's doing anything anyway. It's I don't know, man. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen locally and nationally and internationally in 10 years. The world could be so different in 10 years.
Oh yeah.
It's just
crazy.
The
world is unrecognizable from what it was in 2019, and I know that's because of the coronavirus and everything. But just so everybody's clear, the changes that have taken place over the past 6 months in the Western world are not going away when coronavirus goes away. The powers that the system has used coronavirus to justify are not going to be relinquished. I would be surprised if the lockdowns even ever end. Like, as soon as coronavirus is no longer the public health hazard of the day, there's going to be something new. Like, everybody is so health conscious now. We can't even send our children to school because they might catch the flu. I just don't think... I think this fear of disease that didn't exist in 2019 but does now is a permanent fixture of society now. I don't know. I think society has changed.
The good news is it hasn't even been a year. That's the good news. Is that it's not like we've been in this for 5 years now. It's not even been 1 year. So that is good news. It's neutral news. I'm saying it's not as bad as it could be, but yeah, I don't know. I'm beginning to wonder if the elite just want to rule over a zoo. Like, will the United States ever really dissolve? It's difficult for me. I mean, the Soviet Union dissolved. That was a world superpower, and it dissolved. It broke up because of internal pressures. There were tanks in Moscow and tanks in Vilnius, where my mom is from, and all this stuff. There were tanks there, and this world superpower collapsed. It's difficult to imagine it happening in the United States, but maybe it's possible. Maybe it's not possible, on the other hand. And maybe the elites know what's going on, but they just want to live in a zoo. It's Brazil on steroids. And, like, they'll live in D.C. with their armed guards, and they'll look outside their windows, the bulletproof windows, and they're going to just see the rest of the country on absolute fire. and that's it. The United States Navy's a polity won't dissolve it. It's going to turn into a fucking zoo, like a wilderness preserve almost, like the Wild West, exactly like the Wild West from the old days, where it was nominally part of the United States, but there was no law. The bigwigs will just live in Washington, D.C. I don't know where they get their food from, but they get their food from somewhere, and the rest of the country would just be a lawless hellhole. Or if not lawless, I bet to be parts with an anarcho-tyranny. Antifa basically runs the show, and parts where it's the jackboot against conservatives, like where there's still conservatives.
For the past 100 years, perhaps longer, the end goal of the elite has been to consolidate all the wealth in the world underneath them and to reform the old feudalist model of society with bankers and business elites and politicians at the top and everybody else, just running the machines on the bottom. I think that's what we're transitioning into. I don't know if coronavirus was part of the plan, but it certainly accelerated that process. I mean, we've seen the collapse of the small business economy in the United States, and all that wealth, so much wealth, has been transferred to big business, and we're never getting it back. Like, they control all the wealth now.
I bet that the coronavirus was real, and we didn't know what it was at first, and the reactions from the global elite actually make perfect sense. They didn't support lockdown at first because they thought maybe Trump or populists would support let's bring industry back home. Because Nick Fuentes talked about this, and he was completely right, where Trump was handed on a silver platter a blank check to do whatever he wanted. In the name of coronavirus prevention, you can bring industry home, raise wages, deport workers, ban immigration, all this stuff. So they were like, don't do that, it's racist. When they realized it became toothless and that small businesses were suffering, then they doubled down. They went from opposing anything to doubling down. And that's been the switch, because the change has been very real. Back in the day, I've said this countless times, but back in the day, when Fauci became a public figure, people associated him with Trump. He had been on since, I think, the 80s or something, or the 90s, Democratic and Republican presidents. He's basically a nonpartisan guy. But he became a public figure with this coronavirus, and no one had ever heard of him before. Now they're hearing of him for the first time, and they're associating his face with Trump. So everything was anti-Fauci and anti-Trump because he was conceived of as being a Trump shill. And then all the conservatives were saying we need to lock it down. We all had on those hazmat suit profile pictures, and I was out looking for masks in January and February. They were all sold out already, but there were no lockdowns in place. There were no nothing, and we all wanted masks, and we were mocking people who were hugging, like Italians were hugging Chinese people in the street, and we would share the graphics about comparing the unemployment rate claims, and we were saying, oh, the liberals are insane. We need to take this seriously. We can't trust China. It's the bat soup. It's crazy. These are gross, diseased, infectious people.
Can't stop travel. That would be xenophobic. You racist.
What's so funny is
how the turns have tabled since then.
Well, yeah, because it's always the inverse of logic. There's this danger. I remember this line, was it China lied, people died, implying it was this dangerous thing. I mean, they probably actually contributed to it. They should have been, because no one really knew. I don't even think the Chinese government really knew back in the day. And that's why all these conspiracies abounded. Maybe it was being investigated in a bioweapons lab. Not everything in a bioweapons lab is meant to nuke the world. Not everything in a bioweapons lab is necessarily super lethal. They can be doing research on different strains, on different pathogens. But what happened was it broke out. We didn't know what happened. China wasn't being forthcoming because they probably didn't have all the details, and they're naturally like that. So logically, we said, we don't know what the hell this is. So let's be careful for a few months. Let's actually really lock everything down for a few months and let it burn out, and then it should be gone from the world. And there are people who disagree with that, people who said, no, we need herd immunity. But we were always willing to listen, I think, to different sides. And then it became clear that this really was just like the common cold. I'm not scared of COVID-19 at all. I'm not scared of the coronavirus. If I get it, and I'm expecting the common cold, that's what I'm expecting. That's in my mind now. I'm not thinking this is airborne Ebola or airborne AIDS. I'm thinking This is like the common cold, and I'm totally not worried about that. And that's how the society is operating right now. And so when we realized that, we said, okay, well, we need to open things back up because now this is having other very real damaging effects on the economy. Liberals love to mock us for saying the economy, but it's like, hey, these damages are real. This mental health aspect, this economic aspect is real and causing real damage. So we need to open things back up. If some people get sick, that's why the hospitals are there. It's a cost-benefit analysis. Like, are some people going to get sick? Are some people going to die? Of course. But that's not to say that, therefore, that if we prevent those specific problems coming from the disease, that the rest of the world will remain problem-free. We have to manage the pressure in the different valves that everything is as healthy as possible. And now that we've realized that it's actually not that big of a deal, and we can return to handling it like how we handle the flu every year, or even common cold in cold season, now all the liberals are saying, no, we need to have it shut down, as all the wealth is sucked out of these businesses. It's so weird. I don't know, because it's so funny. As soon as they think their profits are threatened, they toe a certain line. Oh no, Trump's going to bring the manufacturing back. No closed borders. Hug Chinese people. If you don't, that's racist. And then we realize it's the common cold, and now all the small businesses have been nuked. So the big corporations like Amazon are picking up the pieces and laughing.
Liberals are able to do this, flip back and forth between contradictory viewpoints, as long as it goes against white people. They're able to do this in a way that conservatives can't. Like, I know we're not conservatives, right?
Yeah.
And liberal and Democrat and Republican, that's the kosher sandwich. And they're all stupid, right? But I honestly think there is something genetically wrong with the majority of liberals that makes them able to do this. It's no longer reconcilable. Conservatives at least have the right instincts, but liberals have no instincts. They're so easily led. We're not reconcilable. There needs to be some kind of breakup in this country. The country has to split apart at some point. We can't coexist in this country anymore, and the escalating violence is proof enough of that. It's not going away.
Honestly, I think we have a serious issue. We need to talk about the blacks, because we have a serious issue with where the blacks are going to go and what they're going to do, because it's obvious where the Hispanics are going to go. It's like, okay, look, I'm not thrilled about the idea of cleaving off the southwestern United States and giving it back to Mexico. That would be a huge revanchist win for the Mexicans. But in terms of raw practicality, give them California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado. Give it to them. And
give them the southern parts of those states. We can keep the northern parts. But okay.
Well, as long as they have an Aztlan or however they pronounce it to go to, that would be a great containment zone for them. And then, I mean, we can rebuild afterward. You know, Canada and the United States, you can gain whatever territory you lose in the southwest of the United States, you can more than regain by amalgamating Canada. There's a lot of good people up here. I know that. The people from Toronto, the people from Montreal, these liberals, they can be deported somewhere. I don't know where they would go. We'll sort that out later. But like, you can more than make up for the territory with good land in the north up here. But with the blacks, it's difficult, and I don't know where we're going to put them because they don't really have a natural place. My thinking is Louisiana, actually. And the reason I say that is because Louisiana, there's a large Acadian presence in Louisiana, but they can all move back to Quebec. The Acadians were originally displaced from the north. They live around in Maine and Quebec and that sort of area. It's kind of split between New England and Canada, the Acadian population. They were moved down to Louisiana as transplants, and that's where you get the name Cajun. But it's not really part of traditional Anglo-Germanic, Anglo-Teutonic America. It's really not. It's got a strong French culture, and that French culture has been basically displaced. It's very true. Now, don't get me wrong. I know there's a lot of.
I agree with the Louisiana. I mean, New Orleans. That's a center of black culture in America.
There's probably going to be a lot of Cajuns down there that are upset at that notion, but we can't please everybody.
I mean, sorry. They got to go somewhere.
You can go back home. The Acadians can go back to their home in Quebec and Maine and Vermont. That's where they came from. We're bringing them back. We're returning to tradition. We can't deport all the blacks to Liberia. It's not feasible. It's not possible. In any sort of post-race revolution, look, we're not going to go full Pierce. It's not going to happen.
We're not even deporting all the blacks in America to Louisiana when this goes down. Look, this is how I think it's going to happen. I think we're going to set aside a portion of the country. We're going to write a constitution for them that says, you know what, in this portion of the country, Louisiana, I suppose, only black people can vote and hold public office. And any white people that live in Louisiana, hey, we'll give you financial support if you're looking to move out of Louisiana. And we'll put sanctions on Louisiana if they persecute you for being white. But it's up to you if you want to stay there. And as for the blacks and the rest of the country, hell, we'll give you a bit of financial support if you want to move to Louisiana. But new constitution says you're not going to be able to vote here, and you're not going to be able to hold public office. I think that will
incentivize movement.
Yeah, I suppose, but of course they'd all want to live in white America because it's going to be nicer. That's just how it is. That's just how it's going to be. So for the ones that choose to stay, there's going to be, I think, a one-child policy. I think that would make sense.
Yeah, I think we should. I don't want to. This is not Christian. This is pretty dark. But for a long period of time, especially when I was more skeptical of Christian, because everybody knows that I am notorious for religiously flip-flopping. But that's because I'm very reluctant to commit myself to anything unless I'm certain that it's 100% true. But there was a period of time where I was less convinced of Christianity, and I thought we should just give financial incentives so the blacks will have abortions. I don't know if I can support that anymore. That's not Christian. But I mean, we do need to have some sort of. I think in any post civil strife society, I think we need to have our version of the CIA, whatever it is. We need to work closely with countries like Ghana, countries like Nigeria, and say, look, you people are the descendants of the original slavers who we bought from, and you are partly to blame for their presence here, and this is your kin, and they're from your continent. There needs to be a return to Africa movement. I don't care. Like, I'm not saying this all has to be, kumbaya. If we have to pull some shady CIA shit in Africa in order to make this better, then I'm all for it. But there needs to be a movement endorsed by both the Western Hemisphere and the Africans for a movement of the Africans back, and that has to be the case. Again, I'm not saying we have to deport them all. That's even possible, but it has to be on the table all the time.
Yeah, the problem is Africans are pretty. They don't like African Americans too much because they see the rioting that goes down in America. But that's simply because. But I mean, the rioting happens because there's a wealth inequality between whites and blacks in America, and blacks feel like that is unjust because they don't recognize the genetic differences. But
I think rioting is.
So I think there's a good case to be made for these African countries. We could say, the reason that they're rioting is because of this wealth inequality, but that wouldn't exist in your country. In fact, they have a higher IQ. Our African Americans have a higher average IQ than your people, so this would actually benefit you to take these people back. But so yeah, I can see that.
I think I don't think Africans just riot. I think they look for an excuse to riot. But Africa itself is notoriously violent.
Right,
even dictators have the entire wealth of a country. Well, they won't riot per se, but they will engage in very violent acts. They'll have an entire harem of prostitutes, and they'll just randomly shoot people for fun. Generals are eating the guts of each other. So, I'm not saying that these people are. I would disagree slightly with the assessment that they're rioting because they're concerned about economics. I think that's just a reason for them to latch onto. It's because Whitey keeps me down. I don't really think it's the case. I think they're naturally predisposed to that violence. But I don't know. There needs to be some sort of a transfer. They have to go back. They have to move down to Louisiana, and from Louisiana they have to move back. And that's kind of everywhere else is a one-child policy. That's it. And after you're one child, you're sterilized.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm not into forced sterilization or forced abortion, so you know what? We will pay you to get sterilized. Sure,
yeah, exactly.
Fine, I'm willing to grant that.
You know, we can even do reverse tax incentives. If you have if you have no children as an African, you get huge tax breaks. But the more children you have, exponentially worse your taxes are. And there can be zones in America, like in Louisiana, for example.
I don't know if they have the the foresight to take that into account when they're having children. But
that's another good point. Yeah, I don't know, man. Sometimes we treat them as if they're a little bit smarter than they really are. Man, they're such a mistake, dude. Bringing them over here, holy smokes. What a disaster.
I'm all for reparations. Reparations, definition. Setting things back the way they were. As in, go back.
Yeah, man, like this is just this makes me think of everything that's going on. All this talk. The country is rotting. You know what it feels like? It feels like I'm a plumber or on a ship, and the pipes are leaking in 80 places at once. The ship has 80 holes in it, and I'm trying to plug them all at once and throw the water out with a little pail or a little bucket, and I just can't. I can't do it. There are too many problems. We have a weak president in Trump, and we have too many minorities, and Antifa is too strong, and the conservatives are too weak.
Conservatives still think that they're going to get themselves out of this by debating the left. Like, I'm sorry, but the left exists under assumptions about the way reality works that are totally different from you. You're not going to change their minds. And even if you can change their minds on one issue, there's 1,000 more that you still got to change their minds on, and we don't have 1,000 years to fix this. So
the left operates kind of with the or the right, I mean, operates with the understanding that everyone is convincible. And it's like, okay, that's not true. Like, even if it were hypothetically true, you cannot sit down with every individual person and talk to them forever and expend all the time and all the calories convincing them of every point. That's not tenable. That's not doable. But moreover, this is actually one way that it must have been one of our guys secretly working in a normie conservative. Like, I think even Prager University released a video a few years ago talking about the dangers of legal immigration. And it's because at the end of the day, even if you divorce the understanding from race, certain people are just predisposed to certain ideas. Like Lenin and Stalin and Marx and Engels, they had their ideas. And even if you want to say that it had nothing to do with race, even if you want to reference absolutely white people, like British communists or whatever, something about them makes them predisposed to thinking communistically. And so if you want to look outside racial boundaries and look at individuals and the way that fathers and mothers raise their children and cultures at large, if you want to divorce that from race, you still walk away with the understanding that certain demographics, that is the left that currently exists, the white liberals that currently exist, Hispanics, blacks, etc., in different proportions, they're all comprised of people who are unconvincible. Even if you don't want to believe it's for racial reasons, even if you don't want to believe it's because they're predisposed to whatever it is, like, you know, time preference, impulse control, however those dials are tuned, such that they have these proclivities and predispositions to liking socialism. Like, if you want to get outside that and you just want to say, well, for whatever reason, idiosyncratically and individually, they're not convincible, then they're just not convincible, you know? It doesn't even have to be rooted in race at the end of the day. There are certain people who are just not convincible, but the right operates as everybody is. And it's not true. It's not true on racial ground. It's not true in the way that I just tried, and probably rather poorly, tried to explain that, like, even on an individual level, some people are just not convincible. And even if it were possible, we don't have the time and energy to do that.
Right. And the right operates as if, we often say that, the right likes to say that liberals operate on the assumption that everybody is basically good, but so do conservatives. They think that you can just show facts and logic to somebody and that they're just going to side with you. And the truth is, with liberals, even if they think that you're right about something, they're still going to shill for their side, because for them it's more about their social standing than it is about any true morality or truth.
Yep. NPCs, doesn't matter what facts and figures you show to them, they have the same pre-programmed responses.
It's not even necessarily an NPC thing. It's like they recognize that adopting a certain worldview or a certain opinion is going to raise their social standing, so that's what they do. To them, that's completely and totally rational, and I suppose it is on some level. It's just it's self-destructive in the long term.
Yeah, they don't think long term. They think individually. Anyway, I'm depressed.
No
Yeah.
reason. I don't think any system built on lies, the way that this one is sustainable. Whether it takes 5 years or 10 years or 100 years, the world's gonna return to sanity eventually.
Well, the only reason that certain things arose the way they did it originally, like patriarchy and masculine values, and is because that was forged by the crucible of natural selection to begin with, which means that it's custom tuned for nature. We have this controlled environment, this large petri dish we're all living in, where natural influences and natural factors are prevented from reaching us by the shielding of culture. But in the absence of that culture, as the acidic inside of the petri dish rots the protective shielding, we're going to return to tradition one way or another, because that's the reason that these hierarchies and structures existed in the first place. This is a response to nature, an adaptative response to nature. So the more we return, the more society crumbles, the longer, how am I trying to say here? The more society crumbles, the closer we get to returning to tradition. But of course, people don't just want to return to tradition. There's an element of like look, the Hottentot people in the southern part of Africa and the Melanesians in the middle of buttfuck nowhere in the Indian Ocean or whatever, they've also returned to tradition. It's a matter of preserving the certain, like, we have value in our own existence. You know what I mean? Like, we as white people and the way we do things, we have an aesthetic and a natural value in our own existence, and that also has to be preserved. It's not a matter of just perennial tradition manifesting everywhere. Like, that's great that the Pygmies in the Congo and the Hadza people in Southeast Africa and the Andamanese in the Indian Ocean, that they all are living like monkeys. Oh, that's so great, But it's also a little bit more than that, because I don't have a concern for humanity at large. I have a concern for my people. I don't look at the Sentinelese people and applaud them for doing what they do. I'm rooted in my concern. When the blacks are chimping out, that's an expression of actually more of an animalistic, natural sort of thing. Maybe it's paradoxical to think about, but it's not this manicured, I'm this weird bisexual guy sitting in an office in New York City painting my nails. It's very animalistic and primal, but it's also not good, because our lens finds its borders around our own people. And it's not just literally return to monkey. We also take stock in and value our traditions and our religious beliefs and stuff like that. So it's not just a matter of we're going to return to tradition when things fully collapse. It's also a matter of we have to return to a natural way of doing things while honoring and preserving ourselves and seeing the value in our own existence. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's an extension of self-preservation, which is why it's become so frustrating and confusing to see liberals take the sides that they do, because it just seems like common sense to us at this point that it makes sense to want to preserve your biological existence. And that's what ethno-nationalism is an extension of at the end of the day. It's simply biological self-preservation. And it's like liberals don't even have this sense of self-preservation. It's why they take the side against the cops who thought they were about to be killed by whatever black guy they shot today, or against Kyle Rittenhouse, who so obviously would have been killed by skateboard guy had he not fired those shots. They think it's insane that he defended his own life. They think that if they were in that situation, they would not have done the same. They would have turned the other cheek and just let it happen, and the world would be a better place for that, and they'd experience some kind of it's like they expect some kind of reward, even though they're not religious and don't necessarily believe that there's justice carried out in some afterlife. They operate as if liberalism is a religion and they're going to be rewarded for acting a certain way in this life, even though they don't explicitly believe that there is a spiritual underpinning to the world. I don't know.
Well,
it's wild.
It's also worse than that, because they don't just they go beyond just the aspect and element of self-defense. They talk as if this Kyle kid shouldn't have even been there, that he was somehow in the wrong for identifying what happens in these riots, the pattern of behavior, and saying, hey, I'm going to defend businesses and properties. They act as if he had no right to do that, and that the protesters and rioters should have had free reign to do whatever they wanted, and smashed and burned and looted and killed and assaulted. Like I don't know. These people are divorced from reality. This is so pernicious too. It's so Pharisaic in the way that it's like, it's selfish, but it's they try to clothe it in this concern trolling for others. It's like they want to do these things because it gives them a buzz. They're like moving up their social position. It makes them feel that they're concerned for themselves, and that's why they are invested in their social position. And they clothe it in this false righteousness. It's not righteous what they're doing, and it's obvious that this Kyle kid was doing the right thing. But because of the popular paradigm pushed by the media and academia and the Jews, it's like, did you see what I'm getting at here? Like,
yeah.
Like they're concerned for themselves, and they clothe themselves in false righteousness. That's exactly what the Pharisees did. They were selfish and hubristic, and they wanted to be seen by others as being moral. And so they clothed themselves in false righteousness. That's definitionally what a Pharisee would do. And they're just like Pharisees. They're just demonic people.
Yeah, that's exactly what liberals do. So I suppose I was wrong in a sense. There is a sense of self-preservation there, but
it's literally the self, not the group they're a part of.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with other people. It's just their own social standing.
And what's especially sick is that it's quite often twisted with like cuckoldry. It's, if you're white, well, I'm going to worship black ascendants, and then you become atomized in the process, and you're moving up your social standing. But in order to do that, you have to actually divorce yourself from what you really are and your natural community, and embrace the cuckoldry. Oh, I'm white, I'm evil. So on one hand, you're stroking that narcissistic part of your ego by buying into the paradigm, but at the same time, you're accepting someone else's superiority over you. It's very twisted. It's like demons have come in from the fourth dimension and tied these people in four-dimensional knots, and then their 3D rendering and representation is this incomprehensible Lovecraftian horror that we have to take a fucking college course on every week with these podcasts to try to understand.
I don't even know how to respond to people who try to morally condemn me for racialism or any of my other positions anymore.
Honestly, I think the best way to do it is go full Theoden. Like in Return of the King, where it's after the Rohirrim have smashed into the army of orcs, everyone's like celebrating, and in the distance you hear these horns, and you got those big Mumakil elephants coming with the Haradrim on them. And then all the Rohirrim are like looking at the elephants or the Mumakil, and they're like, oh shit, and you can see it on their faces. And Theoden, the king of Rohan, for a moment is like, you can see it on his face. And then he just immediately gathers his resolve, and he just draws his sword again, and he puts it up in the sky, and he just goes, take them head on. And then he just goes, charge, and then they just go. That's the way to do it, is you don't tiptoe around and say, oh, well,
I don't care. I don't care about their moral condemnations. Because at the end of the day, look, you genetically will not exist in 100 years because of the positions that you hold right now. So why the hell would I listen to you?
Yeah, exactly. Like, nature doesn't care.
Nature does not care. You are going to be weeded out of the genetic pool, and my grandchildren will inherit the earth, not yours, because you are acting against your own self-interests. So why would I care what you think?
It really doesn't. It doesn't matter. Like, people who hand ring, imagine two groups of people. There's one group of people who hand ring, and there's another group of people who don't. And the people who don't even have the possibility, because of their genes, they cannot experience that emotion of hand-wringing. And these two groups face an external threat. Well, the group that hand-wrings is going to get creamed and destroyed, and then they're going to be gone, and no one's going to think about them ever again. And all their moralizing, and all their morals, and all their ethics have dissipated and radiated and sublimated into the ether. And the other group that literally didn't have the ability to think like that kills their enemy and doesn't think twice about it and propagates. And then, the universe does not care. Space-time and matter and energy do not care. What happens is people have these chemical reactions in their fucking brains, and they project them outwards, and they think that these emotions have cosmic importance. So, and I know that sounds atheistic, but really, it's very practical at times to think evolutionarily and think in terms like that. This is why I don't understand vegans. They're so concerned about all these things, but it's like nature doesn't give a shit about your morals and your animals and your concern for animal suffering. It doesn't. No one cares. First of all, the animals don't even care. And you shouldn't care either, because you're projecting into you're imagining that history is this thing that's like there and it's judging you, and you're projecting these morals onto it and into it, and it's totally immaterial. It doesn't matter. It's gone. It's over. It's all transient. Stop wringing your hands. And these people get removed from history. And I know that's not a very religious or a very Christian way of thinking of things, but it's goddamn practical. That's for sure. And it's true to a degree.
They're the ones thinking religiously, even though they condemn religion. Their way of thinking is inherently religious.
Yeah, exactly.
They think there's some kind of cosmic justice being played out, and that their fake morality is going to, that they're somehow going to be justified after they die or something. That's how they live their lives, at least. I mean, it's so funny watching these I effing love science tier atheists make fun of like Amish people or something. Well, in the past 100 years, the Amish population has increased tenfold, and meanwhile you had one child and then had your tubes tied. Like,
yeah.
I'm sorry, you make fun of them all you want, they're still going to inherit the earth.
Yeah, it's so funny, because really all that happens, and I know this is going to sound somewhat atheistic, and I'm not an atheist, but I spend a lot of time there, and so I know kind of what it's like. But really, what morals now we can talk about God and where morals come from this way, but really on a practical level, on an analytical level, morals are what register as feelings in your mind. There are all sorts of behaviors that theoretically some alien race, if they saw you practicing those, or if they were to practice them themselves, could give rise to very bad feelings. When you think of things you don't like, when you think of ideologies like communism you don't like, they give you a bad feeling in your gut. But to a communist and to people who perform these bad things, it gives them a good feeling, and that's how they identify what's good or bad. When we talk about murder, when we talk about rape, when we talk about all these things, they're charged with this emotional power that causes you to register in your mind. But for a psychopath, for example, who doesn't have the ability to think and operate that way, those feelings that you're calling morality don't register with them, and so they don't think about them. That's why I brought up the example with the aliens, right? Like, there could be behaviors that, like sitting down in a chair, that would be the equivalent of murder to them, because it induces in them the exact same physical response that you just don't think of. And you can apply that to other things as well, like eating meat, for example, or taking a stand, like being racist. All these things, if they don't cause an emotional reaction inside your gut, inside your soul, you're not going to conceive of those things as being moral or not. They're either going to be moral or neutral. You know what I mean? It's like with communism. When communists conceive of their ideology, it gives them a warm, fuzzy feeling inside. It feels like doing the right thing to them. Do you know what I'm saying there?
Yeah.
Like, it's all dependent on how it makes you feel. That now,
at
we
the
would
end
go
of the
beyond
day,
that. And,
at the end of the day, we could say all morality is just emotional manipulation.
yeah, exactly. There is no cosmic. I mean, we would say there is because we believe in God, but dragging it down into practicality, there's not.
And that's why
there's no cosmic
that's
justice.
why, that's why morality. You can't say that just because a certain commandment in the Bible makes you feel bad that's what modern churches try to do is certain commandments in the Bible make them feel bad, so they just pretend they're not there. Well,
yeah.
I think that's even further proof that this is that it comes from God, is that despite it making you feel bad, it's still
moral.
a commandment. It's still moral. That's how you know that it's not a invention of mankind. Is that it's still moral despite you not feeling comfortable with it.
This is I think the reconciliation, because I went very atheistic there almost for a moment, saying there is no real morality, there's only practicality, nature is the greatest fascist, this sort of thing, right? But at the same time,
real
I wanted
morality isn't going to always make you feel good. That's the point.
Yeah. I say there is no cosmic justice, there's only God's justice. God has property rights. That's what it comes down to. God, there's no cosmic justice, there's God's justice. And just because to illustrate that, we would say, just because it makes you feel good or doesn't, it doesn't make it moral. And that's the reconciliation that I think it is. Because I do believe in God. I want to make that clear. And I think that there is real morality, but it's not independent of God. It is God. God, it's, you know what I mean? Like, yes. I wouldn't, no, I don't want to get too autistic, because people will sometimes say, oh, well, so morality is arbitrary or morality exists without God. And it's kind of, the real reconciliation is that it's neither. It's that God is morality. That's kind of been the traditional response to the Euthyphro dilemma. But for practical purposes, and to make it easier to digest, and for illustrative purposes, I would say, well, yeah, morality is arbitrary. It's what God wants, and deal with it. It's not like that, but for argumentative purposes, yeah, deal with it. So, anyway, how long have we been talking now?
2 hours.
Oh, okay, I think that's a good podcast length.
Yeah, that's good.
All right, well, because I'm going to go home and eat some dinner now, so.
All right. Well, this has been a good talk, I think. Got a lot of things off our chests
it was both
we've
depressing.
been thinking about for a while.
It was depressing, but it was also constructive.
Yeah.
I don't feel like, well, I actually prefer the talks where we talk about other like little autistic things like astrology or whatever. I like to talk about that more, because this kind of actually drains the soul out of me. But it was very constructive, I feel, and it was one of the best ones yet, I think, for that reason.
Yeah, this is one that new listeners and people who are new to our ideas can kind of use as a baseline to predict what our positions on things will be in the future, because we covered very basic stuff here, like deconstructing conservatism and liberalism, and constructing a new baseline for what is moral and how we should view the world. Yeah,
I think this was just a lamentation on the state of the world.
Yeah, it was good.
Well, I gotta go.
All right. And we'll talk next week.
Yep.
See ya.